If your self-esteem has taken a backseat in your long-term relationship, don't worry, you're not alone, especially in long-term relationships where there's some nuances with dynamics, changes in roles, becoming parents, aging, health changes, career changes, the list can go on, can also mean that it can impact how you show up to the relationship, how good you feel, as well as if you start to put yourself last. Watch this video where I'm going to go through some things that you can do to continue staying true to yourself, have high self-esteem while also maintaining your relationship. All right, let's jump in. So one thing I really want to talk about in this video is really about the fact that self-esteem is pretty fluid, that it can change over time. It's not a fixed trait. It's something that can shift, especially if you're done work on working on your relationship on yourself, it can definitely shift. You know, I'm all proponent for self-acceptance, self-compassion, not really getting so stuck on having these positive views of yourself all the time, but really being able to move through when you're not feeling so great and still show up to your life in a meaningful way. But when we think about this fluid concept and we think about how that can relate to a long-term relationship, in this I'm talking about more not necessarily if you struggled with self-esteem from the get-go, more so if you had a really good sense of self, but being in a long-term relationship really eroded that over time, and why that is, what changes in the relationship could have contributed to that, and even if it's really normal, what you can start to do to shift that back. So one thing to really think about is how different phases in your relationship can really shift kind of the way you feel about yourself. So think about the version of you when you first met your partner and you were dating. If you were thinking of that version of you, do you felt like you felt pretty good about yourself, pretty confident, pretty self-secure? If I asked that version of you like what you wanted out of life or a relationship, and then we compare with the current day version, what would I see? Would I see kind of meaningful growth and change in a sense of like feeling really kind of you've lived your life in a value-driven way? Or the opposite, would I really feel like, man, this version of me, I don't really know where I went. I lost her or him and I'm not really sure why. Of course, we can all evolve and change, but that overall, when you compare these, you have a sense of, I'm feeling pretty proud of where I am now. So one thing that can really be helpful to think about is how you've evolved in your relationship, right? So the version of you when you were dating versus maybe when you were more committed relationship, you moved in together versus being married, and then versus if you became parents, had kids, or now 20 years later, you're thinking of retiring. So think about you in relation to all these different phases of your relationship. And then add in, right, another huge factor can be life changes or changes in roles. So clearly, like you, even if you were in a long-term relationship, that might be different than saying now you're married, versus definitely could be different now adding in the role of being a parent, being a mother or father, and how that shifts versus now even adding in the role of being a grandparent. So all these different changes in terms of your life roles can play a huge role. I also find that especially for parents or new parents, or even someone that's been a parent for a while, managing that role of how do I take care of, right, other living human beings, and then how do I also still maintain a focus on myself? How do I still acknowledge and honor what I need versus not getting so consumed exclusively on this human being's needs or multiple human beings' needs? Even though I love them and I want that for them, I also want to maintain and model a healthy sense of having your own needs and wants, and that's completely normal. So really kind of being clear on, are those changes, these changes in your roles, part of the reason that maybe you feel like you're losing yourself? And even that, what does losing yourself look like? Does that mean you've just started to neglect your needs, or you've ignored your needs because it doesn't kind of really fit the mold with what your family needs or wants from you? Another important change that can impact this is any career changes. So thinking about if you were someone that really strongly identified with your career path or your choices, and maybe you did a lot of work to get there, and for whatever reason you had to take a step back, and maybe you or a partner was able to continue on their career path, but you weren't for whatever reason, and you made that as a mutual decision in your family, but yet that has also impacted the way you feel about yourself. So maybe one of you has become a homemaker, and that shifts how you feel about yourself or who you really are, right? If you're no longer a lawyer, then who am I? What does that mean? How do I let go of that identity, or how do I incorporate parts of that identity that are still important to me, but I'm not really acting on those? Can I feed those in other ways in my life right now? Also thinking about, to a certain degree, the dynamics of money, if that is something that's changed in your relationship, in terms of if you are someone that has shifted in your career, or maybe financially you're not contributing as much, does money and how much you bring into the household impact the way you feel about yourself? Is there kind of some unconscious or subtle or maybe obvious message that your partner and you are sharing about money? So it's like, well, I'm the one that's bringing the money, so it's not our money, you should be really grateful. Or vice versa, you just don't feel that great because you're not financially contributing, but you're contributing in other ways. So that's something to really think about, the role that that can play in how you're feeling about yourself. Another really important thing is the fact that you and your partner are both aging together, right? So if you've been with someone for a long time, right? If you think about it, if you see pictures of you from 10 or 15 years ago and you see pictures of you now, right? Clearly there's aging that's happening and that's completely normal and okay. But thinking about, especially if you're someone that over identifies with your appearance and your age as a sense of self or self-worth. And of course, I want to acknowledge that we live in a beauty obsessed society and culture, and probably even more so for women, that's a huge focus. So really, if you start to look at aging and you're starting to see yourself differently, does that impact the way you feel? Changes in your body, again, does that impact the way you feel and how you show up to the relationship, and even how you show up to your physical relationship with your partner, intimacy, sex, because you don't feel so good about yourself physically, right? And again, that's something to really work through and heal. The other thing to really even think about, a nuance of that, is if there's been any changes to health. So if long-term one or both of your partners have had changes to your health, does that impact the way you feel, just even physically? But does that impact the way you feel even emotionally? Is there a sense of not being able to show up to your relationship the same way because of these health changes? Have these health changes also had a detriment to your life, and that's just impacted the way you feel, how good you feel about yourself, and how good you feel as a partner in your relationship, things like that. Another sneaky way it can show up is really kind of settling into routines and getting really comfortable with one another, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but comfortable in terms of like you and your partner are doing the work to really foster your relationship, or focus on yourself to really be clear on like what are your needs, what makes you feel good, how do you prioritize that. You kind of just get stuck in these like stale routines that you just do, and you don't really focus on getting outside of the box. But over time, like years can pass and you realize, oh my gosh, we haven't really focused on each other or on ourselves individually. Things have been lost. We're just kind of going on autopilot, but it doesn't feel really good at this point. So it's something to think about. Maybe something else is that there have been really changes to one or both of your values. So that's really important to consider. Have you really radically changed and that change doesn't really coincide with what your partner needs and wants, or vice versa? But because of that, maybe one or both of you has done too much adjusting in a way that isn't healthy for you, or you feel like one of you is always the one that's compromising and it's leading to more resentment. So I really want to think about how you're navigating individual change, values change as a couple, right? How do you make room and space for that if one of you wants something radically different than the other? Something that can really happen in a long-term relationship, especially if there's been like a history of difficulties with communication or conflict, is that maybe there's some attachment wounds that have never been dealt with. So when you think about the relationship and your partner, maybe you kind of really hold on to these negative beliefs or things that your partner has said in the heat of the moment, and that's something you can't really let go of, and that doesn't make you feel good about your partner or about yourself. Another thing to really mention is if your relationship's kind of falling to these conventional societal norms just because, but that's not really what feels right to you. So maybe you never wanted to be a parent, but you feel like all this pressure from your family or society to have kids, and now your partner's feeling this pressure too. So really how you start to maybe feel lessened because you're not conforming to these pressures, or maybe you have a group of friends that are all stay-at-home mom and you wanted to go back at work, and now you feel this pressure, this mom guilt that you're a bad mom because you're not doing that, or vice versa, that you became a stay-at-home mom but you have all these career friends, right? So what I'm talking about is really just being clear of like all the cultural and societal pressure and norms, and really being clear of not falling victim to them, right? So just kind of noticing and acknowledging it for what it is, and then making an intentional decision that at the end of the day, 20, 30, 40, or 50 years from now, all those societal norms are not what's going to make you feel fulfilled. What's going to make you feel fulfilled is you looking back at your life and feeling like you made decisions because they were important to you. Let me know in the comments below which factor has had the biggest impact on your self-esteem in your relationship. Which factor, one that I mentioned or something completely new? Let me know in the comments below. One thing is this concept of growing together and not apart. So this concept of mutual growth, making room for the fact that both of you are going to grow and change. Needs are going to change, values are going to change, roles are going to change. All these things are going to happen. And so making room for that's allowed to happen, that you can really support those individual needs. And then of course you can always come back to the relationship as a secure base. Because when we think about even secure attachment, and we think about the more secure you feel in your attachment figure, the more then you have a sense of autonomy and safety that you can explore the world, and even if things don't go well, you can always come back to this secure base. So really keeping that in mind and not expecting you or your partner to stay fixed and the same throughout your lifetime. So another piece is really having this ongoing sense of having your own personal aspirations and goals outside of the relationship and outside of your family. One way to really do this is to keep self-reflection and values orientation and values inventory top of mind throughout your life. So really have a moment, and it doesn't have to be every day or every week, but maybe every quarter really kind of set a day aside where you just go and rent a hotel room and you really start to self-focus on like, how am I doing for me? Like, how am I doing my needs outside as a partner, outside of my roles in the family, things like that? Am I missing something? Is something not going well? Am I adjusting too much in one way or the other? And of course, you can still evaluate your role as a partner, but also thinking about what are the things that you're going to need to start to implement to really have a sense of like, okay, I'm recalibrating to these other areas of my life or these goals that are really important to me. This next step is all about being honest with yourself. I talked about this building in time to self-reflect, but if you're not really being honest with yourself, then that's not going to be really helpful. So I'm really encouraging you to listen and tune into, are there kind of any emotions that you're noticing that feel uncomfortable, but it's also great data for you to listen to, this sense of like, wow, I always feel like this grief when I see this woman with their own business and they're kind of really putting themselves out there, and it's something that maybe I let go of 20 years ago. Okay, is that trying to tell you something? So really would encourage you to be honest with yourself and tune in and listen to maybe what are some of the uncomfortable feelings they're trying to tell you. What are they communicating to you? Another really important tip is to really make sure that you're navigating all these changes that are happening in your relationship together. So all the changes that I talked about, changes in career, changes in aging, health, roles, becoming parents, all those things, really acknowledging that you're navigating that not only as a relationship, but as individually, like what are your needs? And then how are you addressing that with your partner? So really making sure that you're making the effort, both of you, to support one another in these changes. And if you're starting to feel, especially in a difficult moment in your life, that your needs aren't getting really met, really have the ability of having this open dialogue with your partner about that and really express what you need. Obviously, I know life can be really hard at times and things can all happen at the same time, or maybe you're going through changes, your partner's going through changes, and so it really feels like, oh my gosh, who needs the focus and so forth. I know Brene Brown, I think I heard her say this once before, that her and her husband will really say like, I'm at 80%, where are you? And they'll say like, I'm at 20%. Okay, so you take the brunt of it, or vice versa. So there's that continual checking in with each other, like, where are you at? How much can you give today? How much can you give to that? And consistently feeling like you guys are supporting each other in this, and you as a team are going to figure out what this looks like. This other piece is really practicing some self-validation. So especially in a long-term relationship, maybe you've only focused on exclusively turning to your partner for validation. And I'm not saying let go of that 100%, but I also want you to really practice validating your own needs, especially if they're needs that are different or contrast to what your partner's needs are, or to what your partner wants for you in the relationship or your family. Really taking a moment whenever you acknowledge your needs, kind of really stepping into, this is a valid need, this is something I want, kind of that secure sense of, this is important to me, no matter if no one agrees, this is something that I really want to pursue, or really I want to dedicate time and energy to. As we wrap up this last video in this series on navigating low self-esteem in relationships, I want to thank you for watching these videos, but don't stop here. Go subscribe to my email newsletter. Look at the link below in the comments and description, because that's where you get the first access to any new stories, tips, tools. I constantly create things that I forget to share with anyone else except my email newsletter. So subscribe, because that's the best way to stay on top of everything I'm creating. And like I always say, I encourage you to continue nurturing your mind, body, and soul, whatever that looks like for you guys. Thanks.